Let me ask you a question. How do these images make you feel? My guess is that, regardless of where you live, if you're a self-respecting baseball fan, your fingers are hovering right now over that skip button that's going to send you to the live stream of the reaction video, to the unboxing of a turducken over there. But if you live in the Northeast, you and the dozen Doug's fans that live in your greater metropolitan area are rushing to the nearest body of water to void your stomach in an expulsion event that would make the Boston Tea Party look like someone was feeding the ducks. It's that visceral reaction that makes Harry Frazee the most frequently cited worst owner of all time. After all, who in their right mind would trade Babe Ruth to their crosstown rivals? But it's just not as simple as all that. Today we're going to look at that story and make fun of a bunch of other terrible owners in today's standalone Doug's feature. Look, your family over for the holidays just isn't going to understand your role in the childbirth wing of the hospital. Just tell them that you're heavily involved in child labor so you can get back to YouTube because the Dougs have uploaded a new video. Welcome back to the Dougs, where everything we do is an excuse to tell a lot of baseball stories and a lot of jokes. We will be focusing mostly on the Harry Frazee story, but there's simply too many rich, incompetent old guys making hilarious mistakes to let alone. As such, we've brought Hamish Hamden back to sprinkle in some anecdotes throughout this video, and that's how we're going to kick this one off. So, take it away, Hamish.
Thanks, Johnny. We're going to start with Charles Finley, who sounds like a bit of an insufferable ball bag. Yes, he brings the typical penny-pinching complaints to the table, as he freaked out more than most at the arrival of free agency. In fact, his attempts at a fire sale serve as the legal precedent for the Commissioner of Baseball to step in and say, "Oh my god, no, you're ruining baseball." Although, probably said it in a more American accent. "Oh my god, no, you're ruining baseball." Aside from that, however, he really seemed to be in love with himself. When he convinced the Beatles to give up one of their only off days to play a concert in Kansas City, the tickets read, "Charles O. Finley is pleased to present for the enjoyment of the Beatles fans in mid-America, the Beatles in person," and unintentionally inspired for the benefit of Mr. Kite. He also introduced a mule as the new athletics mascot, but let's be honest, that's kind of awesome. In fact, Johnny, I want to know more. We're going to go mule heavy for a bit. He'd bring it everywhere, whether that be cocktail parties, hotel lobbies, or right smack dab in the middle of a post-game presser he'd been training. He made sure to overfeed the mule ahead of time for that last one, and through all this, he named the mule after himself, as it lovingly became known as Charlie O. But if you're worried that an ego the size of the Green Monster is this man's only fault, don't worry, he was masterfully passive-aggressive as well. He was convinced the Yankees' success could be attributed to their ballpark dimensions, specifically their right field porch, which was just 296 feet from home plate. Well, Chucky says, "Well, I'll have me one of those," but there was an issue. A new rule had been put in place that new or renovated stadiums could not have a home run fence that was shallower than 325 feet. Since creating the short porch was viewed as a renovation, opposed to Yankee Stadium's original, it was ixnayed by the MLB brass. Charles took this as gracefully as you'd imagine, and demanded that a white line be painted on the outfield grass where the wall that he wanted would have been placed, and any time the ball would make it past that line but short of their actual wall, the PA announcer would inform the fans that that would have been a home run at Yankee Stadium. However, once it became obvious that more of these would-be home runs were being called for the opposition, rather than the wonderful product he was putting on the field, the practice quickly stopped. There's an old Scottish saying, "Just because you know whiskey doesn't mean you know haggis." It applies to Tom Werner, who knew television but did not know baseball. The stars that he'd put together to contend for a title did not work out, and once he went the fire sale route, he was sued by the fan base for putting a faulty product on the field. Perhaps the most egregious of his errors was attempting to leverage his television background in order to get a big name to sing the anthem. That big name turned out to be Roseanne Barr, who sounded like this. She closed the whole thing out by spitting on the field. More to come, but for now, back to Johnny and the main content of this video.
I originally thought this was going to be a countdown of the worst owners of all time, so it was off to the internet to see who everyone was talking about. Harry Frazee just kept on coming up. He was number 1 on ESPN, edged out Frank McCord on the Bleacher Report, number 1 on Business Insider, number 1 on thisgreatgame.com. You get the idea. I'm not really here to defend the guy, but I am here to explore a point of view that the media has just oversimplified this just because it's easy. Here at the Dugs, we're real journalists. We aren't just dick jokes. We're dick jokes and we use contrived puns to describe home runs. The narrative's easy because it seems like one sentence will do it for you. Harry Frazee is the biggest idiot in the world because he traded Babe Ruth to the Yankees, where he became the name associated with baseball, while the Red Sox would go 86 years without a world championship, a drought that would then become named after Babe Ruth as the curse of the Bambino. So Ruth is as good of a place to start as any. On May 26th of the 1919 season, the Babe had sunk to a batting average of $179 and had only hit 3 home runs. This helped the Red Sox to a 9-12 record, landing them 7.5 games out of first place in an era where you had to be top of the league in order to qualify for the single-round postseason. Money was hard to come by, despite the fact that the Red Sox had won the World Series the prior year, which was the front end of the Bambino curse bookends. However, their title run coincided with the last year of World War I, which made for an abbreviated season and smaller crowds. Even when he turned it around, eventually ending the year with an OPS north of 1,100 and 29 home runs, Frazee recognized that the Red Sox were becoming a one-man show, and the show, while spectacular, was becoming a bit of a pain in the ass. Ruth wanted to focus all of his efforts on the hitting side of things, which was also problematic since he was arguably the best left-handed starting pitcher in the game at the time. Additionally, the Red Sox 1918 pennant year was the first year Babe had surpassed the number of at-bats in the low 100s, amassing 11 home runs and 382 plate appearances, a mark that was hardly in line with what was to come, and so you don't really have a potential offensive juggernaut as a lock in your head. This didn't stop the Babe from feigning a sore arm regularly to try and get out of his pitching duties. Frazee had his hands full with Ruth on several other fronts as well. He was aware that a team curfew existed, but refused to follow it and filled those late nights with excessive food, alcohol, prostitutes, and car accidents, possibly all at once. He was famously quoted to say, "I'll promise to go easier on drinking and to get to bed earlier, but not for you. $50,000 or $250,000 will I give up women." Ruth was signed to a 3-year contract, but he referred to that as just a piece of paper, and after his 29 home run season of 1919, he demanded a doubling of his salary. This was prior to the era of free agency, so, in his defense, the most likely route to getting what you wanted was to force the issue by being a massive dick about it. He threatened to sit out the 1920 season, saying he might become a boxer, a full-time actor, or tour vaudeville with a professional wrestler. When Frazee wasn't reacting quickly enough for his liking, he instructed his lawyer to up the pressure, which he did with a public statement on Christmas Eve. The funny thing was that Ruth had already been sold to the Yankees for $100,000, which was a huge sum of money at the time, and the Babe just didn't know it yet. Both the Red Sox fan base and the Yankees fan base were split on whether this transaction was a good idea or not, but what Frazee needed the money for is one of the most criticized and divisive factors in evaluating how bad of an owner he was. That's up next, but first, Hamish is back with some more stupid owner stories.
Carl Pohlad started out as a scumbag and only went down from there. His road to becoming rich enough to become a ball club owner was paved by foreclosing on farms during the Great Depression. He applied this shrewd business sense to baseball ownership by actively trying to kill the Minnesota Twins. The league was discussing eliminating teams in the early 2000s, so Carl raised his hand and said, "Ooh, me sir, pick us, pick us." To help the deaf along, he sold the club to Major League Baseball, assuming this would make it easier for them to kill the club and thus line his pockets. When the team retraction fell through, he had his secretary write up a memorandum in his defence which read, "Kill the Twins? No, I meant Bill the Thins." And that leads us nicely to Florida, because if you had to guess who the most profitable franchise was in 2009, would you have said the Marlins? It's shockingly true. Now, was there a Floridian spike in attendance you've forgotten about? No. From 1999 onward, there's only been 2 seasons in which the Marlins haven't ranked last or second to last in National League attendance, and 2009 was no exception. They were bottom of the barrel once again. No, the profitability came from the utter lack of spending Jeffrey Loria exhibited during his stint as owner, forcing the Players Association and the MLB, who typically agree on absolutely nothing, to sit him down and to ask him to please cut it out and maybe spend on some modern conveniences, like more than one type of beer, a second hot dog topping, women's bathrooms.
As we were talking about, what Frazee needed the Ruth money for tends to be the problem. Frazee was a man's man. You give that kind of man a taste of money and he can't help pursue alpha things like your big game safaris, your yacht parties, imported cigars, and of course, musical theater. One of the most hotly debated issues of this whole debacle was whether Frazee was using the proceeds to support his main gig of Broadway producer. Some sources suggest that he wouldn't need to sell Ruth for this purpose because of his success in that role. Between the years of 1911 through 1922, he never went over a year without putting out a new hit on Broadway, frequently sending the production on the road around the country as well. On the flip side, his spring production in the year that Ruth was traded, A Good Bad Woman, only lasted a month before closing. Then again, he had another production go live 3 weeks before the Ruth deal that was a huge success, running for over 200 performances. To put things in perspective, when you take the ticket prices into account for these shows, a success on that level would pull in more money than the Red Sox would in an entire season. So he had a lot of money, but he may have put it all into assets, whether it be the palace that he lived in New York or the 2 theaters he had built. As rich as he was, the New York Times report him as being cash poor. There's evidence to support this as well. Yes, he sold Ruth for $100,000, but his desperation for cash meant that he never saw that full amount. The $100,000 was to be paid in 4 installments of $25,000. The first installment was cash, and the final 3 would be paid over the course of the next 3 years in promissory notes, with interest, so there was actually the opportunity to make even more than that $100,000 price tag. Frazee, however, didn't even make it to that $100,000, because instead of waiting, he sold the rights to the future payments to a bank because it was his money and he needed it now. It doesn't stop there. Frazee was so desperate for cash that in addition to the $100,000 plus he got from the Yankees, he also got a $300,000 loan from Yankees owner Jacob Rupert. In return, he agreed to make interest payments on those loans, which eventually totaled far over the sum of $100,000, so in a way, Frazee kind of paid the Yankees to take Babe Ruth. Even more disgusting, he used Fenway Park as collateral, and so the Yankees kind of sorta owned Fenway for a bit there. And that brings us back to where we started this intro. Get your air sickness bags ready, we're going to talk about other ways Frazee made Boston and New York hold hands, but first we're going to wrap up our installments of Owners Doing Stupid Things.
Oakland fans have quite reasonably a bone to pick with their owner, but he hasn't caused a riot. Yet. You can't say the same of Bob Short. Short was a bit cocky after his decision to move the Minneapolis Lakers to Los Angeles, which, in fairness, turned out to be a masterstroke. He decided, well, that worked once, might as well spam that button as much as he can. He was in charge of the Washington Senators at the time, so decided to move them to Arlington to become the Texas Rangers. This move was so hated by the fan base that in the Senators' last game of their existence, the fans rushed the field with 1 out remaining in the game and forced it to be ruled a forfeit. At the time, the Senators were beating the Yankees by 2, but had to take the loss. And thus they landed in Arlington, Texas, and were forced to play in a stadium that had zero shade from the Texas summer, unless you count the shadow that is being cast over them, both figuratively and literally, by the Dallas Cowboys.
I'm gonna jump in here because this one's quite personal to me. Tom Ricketts may be the only owner in the history of any sport that can lay claim to ending a championship drought of a major market team that lasted over a century. The celebration was proportional to the feat, and that's what makes this reaction 3 seasons later so remarkable.
And that starts with the Marquee Network. The Marquee Network. What do you have against the Marquee Network?
We did a whole video on the Marquee Network, so I won't rehash it, but I'll bring you a little update to fill you in on how the network is going. I personally live well within the Cubs broadcast area and have a Samsung Smart TV, an Amazon Fire Stick, YouTube TV, and an over-the-air antenna, and still, 4 years after this network was created, the only way I can watch a Cub game is if I stream it from my phone or computer and project one of those to the TV. I don't want to be using 2 devices to stream games, Tom. If I'm going to be relying on a stream to pipe to my television, I might as well just pirate the games. How has it been 4 years, Tom? I would assert that Part of the reason Harry Frazee was so hated was that he utterly violated or perhaps even gave birth to the rivalry between New York and Boston, but again, only part of this was his fault. The other party that played a giant role in the Yankee and Red Sox being besties was the commissioner of baseball in Ban Johnson. Last we talked about Ban on this channel, he had banned Ty Cobb for beating up a fan in the stands who had no hands. It's a fun story and we'll link it at the end. While wailing on the handless is a somewhat reasonable offense to get pissed about, his rivalry with Harry Frazee lacks that same level of easy reasoning. Frazee bought the Red Sox directly from a friend of his in Joseph Lannon. The issue was that Harry didn't consult with the king before doing this. Ban Johnson had created the American League, and up until this point, the owner of all the teams within it were essentially handpicked by him and willing to blindly follow whatever was asked of them. Frazee was not one to just fall in line, and it was the saga of Carl Mays that finally pushed Frazee's relationship with the commissioner past the breaking point. Carl Mays had some anger issues. He did not handle losing well, and was not well liked in the locker room. Frazee and Mays didn't see eye to eye on his contract at the beginning of the 1919 season, so he had that going for him as well. He may have decided to just sit out rather than adhere to the terms of his contract, but then the house that he had built for his mother got destroyed in a fire, which he didn't have the best insurance on, so he had to pretty much suck it up and take whatever money the Red Sox were willing to throw at him. Mays finally cracked halfway through the 1919 season when every time he took the mound, it seemed as if he either had received no run support or the defense behind him gave up just a crap ton of unearned runs. On July 13th, he finally had enough after his squad let 4 runs in on errors in the first inning and walked off the field, shouting he would never pitch for the Red Sox again. A reporter that managed to stop him for a quick comment heard that Mays was planning on leaving and going fishing. After hearing about Mays walking away from his team, Ban Johnson wanted to suspend him, which seems reasonable, but Frazee wasn't a fan. If Johnson banned his pitcher, he wouldn't be able to sell him because, daddy needs his show tunes. Mays was a popular acquisition target, but deals for the pitcher sat in purgatory for a stretch of time until it was once again the Yankees that snuck through and bought the rights to the player. Ban Johnson found out about this through a newspaper, which, as you can imagine, pissed him off. He immediately suspended Mays, which put a wrinkle in the Yankees' plan to use him in the championship push that year. This decision created a rift in the American League, aligning the Red Sox, Yankees, and the White Sox just because, I guess, as part of an anti-Ban Johnson alliance. Part of that alliance meant that they weren't seeing eye to eye with the other 5 clubs in the AL, who had become known as the Loyal Five and were pretty much instructed to not make any deals with the traders. So, if they wanted to make any moves, the Red Sox had the White Sox and Yankees to work with, and the White Sox would be up to their neck in their own issues as the Black Sox scandal followed not long after. Trading Babe Ruth to the White Sox for Shoeless Joe Jackson was actually a very real possibility until Shoeless was banned from baseball for life. That's pretty much how things went over the next few years, as all told, Frazee had sent 17 players to the Yankees for either cash or players that ended up injured or falling off a cliff production-wise. But Frazee had to do it. He owned the Red Sox, but never really owned the place they played at, so it was imperative that he secured the ownership of Fenway. He also reportedly wanted to purchase a 3rd theater. His limits in who he could make deals with meant that when the Yankees won their first World Series in 1923, 4 of the 5 pitchers in the rotation had been acquired from Boston, and so started a long history of the Yankees making the Red Sox their bitch. If you felt the pain of that relationship, many would suggest that you have Harry Frazee to thank. That wraps up our story for this week, and as always, if you enjoyed what you saw today, please consider throwing a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, as that's the most likely way the Dugs are going to become a thing. We also respond to pretty much every comment that's left on the video, so if you have anything you'd like to see or let us know, drop us a few comments. Interested in that story about Ty Cobb beating up a hamless person? Or perhaps we can interest you in the story of another owner who tried to kill the St. Louis Cardinals with a little person. Those videos should now be clickable on this end screen here, so feel free to check them out. And as always, I've been Johnny Paprika, hoping all of your balls are fair and all of your wood is good. Good night, everybody.
Say that Johnny Paprika's spicier than an erotic novel about a Carolina Reaper and a ghost paper having a torrid love affair.